destroy and protect. Purport by His divine grace is she Bhaktivedanta. In this regard, the queens might argue, if our husband was protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead when in the womb, why has he not been given protection now? To this question, the answer is Ya Itchai Esa Srijat Idam. 1 second. To this question, the answer is Ya Ichai Isha Srijat Tidam Avyayo Ya Eva Rakshati Ava Lampate Cha Ya. One cannot argue with the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord is always free, and therefore he can protect and can also annihilate. He is not our order carrier. Whatever he likes, he will do. Therefore, he is the Supreme Lord. The Lord does not create this material world at anyone's request, and therefore he can annihilate everything merely by his will. That is his supremacy. If one argues, why does he act in this way? The answer is that he can do so because he is supreme. No one can question his activities. If one argues, what is the purpose of this sinful creation and annihilation? The answer is that to prove his omnipotence, he can do anything, and no one can question him. If he were answerable to us concerning why he does something and why he does not, his supremacy would be curtailed. Okay. That means the Lord can do whatever he wants. He is not controlled by anyone. Okay. Text number 40. Second. Sometimes one loses his money on a public street where everyone can see it, and yet his money is protected by destiny and not seen by others. Thus, the man who lost it gets it back. On the other hand, if the Lord does not give protection, even money maintained very securely at home is lost. If the Supreme Lord gives one protection, even though one has no protector and is in the jungle, one remains alive, whereas a person well protected at home by relatives and others sometimes dies, no one being able to protect him. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are examples of the supremacy of the Lord. Our plan to protect or annihilate do not act, but whatever he thinks of doing actually happens. The examples given in this regard are practical. Everyone has had such practical experiences, and there are also many other clear examples. For instance, Prahlada Maharaj said that a child is certainly dependent on his father and mother, but in spite of their presence, the child is harassed in many ways. Sometimes, in spite of a supply of good medicine and an experienced physician, a patient does not survive. Therefore, since everything is dependent on the free will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, our only duty is to surrender unto Him and seek His protection. Okay, well, that's a very good statement there. That's what we should do, completely surrender to the Lord and seek His protection. Text 41. Every conditioned soul receives a different type of body according to his work. And when the engagement is finished, the body is finished. Although the spirit soul is situated in subtle and gross material bodies in different forms of life, he is not bound by them, for he is always understood to be completely different from the manifested body. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Here it is very plainly explained that God is not responsible for the living entities accepting different types of bodies. One has to accept a body according to the laws of nature and one's own karma. Therefore, the Vedic injunctions is that a person engaged in material activities should be given directions by which he can intelligently apply his activities to the service of the Lord to become free from the material bondage of repeated birth and death. Swakarma sakarma na tam avyarcha siddhim vindati manava. The Lord is always ready to give directions. Indeed, his directions are elaborately given in Bhagavad Gita. If we take advantage of these directions, then in spite of our being conditioned by the laws of material nature, we shall become free to attain our original constitution. Mam evaye prapadyante mayame tam tarantite. We should have firm faith that the Lord is supreme, and that if we surrender to Him, He will take charge of us and indicate how we can get out of material life and return home back to Godhead. Without such surrender, one is obliged to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. Sometimes as an animal, sometimes a demigod, and so on. Although the body is obtained and lost in due course of time, the spirit soul does not actually mix with the body, but is subjugated by the particular modes of nature with which he is sinfully associated. Spiritual education changes one's consciousness so that one simply carries out the orders of the Supreme Lord and becomes free from the influence of the modes of material nature. That's very good. Text 42. Just as a householder, although different from the identity of his house, thinks his house to be identical with him, so the conditioned soul, due to ignorance, accepts the body to be himself, although the body is actually different from the soul. This body is obtained through a combination of portions of earth, water, and fire. And when the earth, water, and fire are transformed in the course of time, The body is vanquished. The soul has nothing to do with this creation and dissolution of the body. Yeah, we're not controlling the body. Purport. We transmigrate from one body to another in bodies that are products of our illusion. But as spirit souls, we always exist separately from the material conditioned life. The example given here is that a house or or car is always different from its owner. But because the attachment, the conditioned soul thinks it to be identical with him, a car or house is actually made of material elements. As long as the material elements combine together properly, the car or house exists. And when they are disassembled, the house or the car is disassembled. The spirit soul, however, always remains as he is. Text 43. Well, when it says here, the spirit soul, however, always remains as he is, that's actually a very profound statement. Everything in the material world is changing, but the devotee who has knowledge of Krishna consciousness is steady in his position as a devotee of the Lord and is being protected by the Lord. Therefore, by regulated principles of Krishna consciousness, one remains steady in his position as a servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in spite of all different situations that may arrive. Text 43. As fire, although situated in wood, is perceived to be different from the wood. As air, although situated within the mouth and nostrils, is perceived to be separate. And as the sky, although all pervading, never mixes with anything. So the living entity, although now encaged within the material body, of which it is the source, is separate from it. Yeah, I mean, in other words, our soul is independent of the body. It is only temporarily seems to be under the control of the body, but it is not. In Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality of Godhead has explained that the material energy and spiritual energy both emanate from him. The material energy is described as Me Bina Prakriti Astada, the eight separated energies of the Lord. But although the eight gross and subtle material energies, namely earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego, are stated to be binna, separate from the Lord, actually they are not. That's as fire appears separate from wood, and as the air flowing through the nostrils and mouth of the body appears separate from the body, so the Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appears separate from the living being, but is actually separate and not separate simultaneously. This is the philosophy of Achintya Beda Abeda Tattva, propounded by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. According to the reactions of karma, the living being appears separate from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But actually, he is very intimately related with the Lord. Consequently, Even though we now seem neglected by the Lord, He is actually always alert to our activities. Under all circumstances, therefore, we should simply depend on the supremacy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and thus revive our intimate relationship with Him. We must depend upon the authority and control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Well, that is the best advice that we can ever have. We are not independent, we're being controlled. However, when we surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in His devotional service, we'll be protected and able to live in a way that we always remember the Lord. That is the sign of a devotee. He never forgets the Lord. Text 44. Yamaraj continued, O lamenters, you are all fools. The person named Yajna, for whom you lament, is still lying before you and has not gone anywhere. Then what is the cause for your lamentation? Previously, he heard you and replied to you, but now, not finding him, you are lamenting. This is contradictory behavior, for you have never actually seen the person within the body who heard you and replied. There is no need for your lamentation, for the body you have always seen is lying here. Well, when someone dies, people say, oh, he's gone. Actually, no, he's not gone. He's lying right in front of your eyes. Purport. The instruction by Yamaraja in the form of a boy is understandable even for a common man. A common man who considers the body, the self, is certainly comparable to an animal. Yasyatma buddhi kunape chidatuke saeva gokara. But even a common man can understand that after death, a person is gone. Although the body is still there, a dead man's relatives lament that the person has gone away. For a common man sees the body, but cannot see the soul. As described in Bhagavad Gita, Dehinosmin yata dehe, the soul, sorry, the soul, the proprietor of the body, is within. After death, when the breath within the nostrils has stopped, one can understand that the person within the body who was hearing and replying has now gone. Therefore, in effect, the common man concludes that actually the spirit soul was different from the body and has now gone. Thus, even a common man coming to his senses can know that the real person who was within the body and was hearing and replying was never seen. For that which was never seen, what is the need of lamentation? Well, people lament like anything. Somebody dies.
Mhm. So it's a very good verse where we're actually interacting with the person behind the body when we interact, but then we don't see. And when the soul leaves, we can feel that that person is no more. But then we're not able to understand the philosophy that there is a soul behind the body. So it's a very Rhetorical question.
Thus, even a common man coming to his senses, that's the main thing, coming to his senses, can know that the real person who was within the body and was hearing and replying was never seen. For that which was never seen, what is the need of lamentation? That's fact. I mean, uh, someone is like a father or a mother, then they die. And the common man, coming to his senses, can know that the real person who was within the body and was hearing and replying was never seen. For that which was never seen, what is the need of lamentation? Okay. That means that the soul has just left that body, but it's still alive. In other words, it's still functioning, but on a different level.
Mm-hmm.
Text 45. In the body, the most important substance is the life air, but that also is neither the listener nor the speaker. Beyond even the life air, the soul also can do nothing, for the super soul is actually the director in cooperation with the individual soul.
Mm.
The super soul conducting the activities of the body is different from the body and living force. Okay. So I am not this body. That's the first principle that we learn in Krishna consciousness. I am not this body. However, I am the eternal servant of Krishna. Otherwise, most people think I am this body and this body is mine. Actually, it's not true. The truth is, I am not this body, and I am the servant of the Lord. In that way, we have an identity that's real. But if you think I am this body, that is unreal because the body is always changing. So you cannot say, I am this body. Purport: the Supreme Personality of Godhead distinctly says in Bhagavad Gita 15:15, Sarvasya chaham hridi sanivisto matak smritir jnanam apahanam cha. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Although the Atma or soul is present in every material body, the Hinosmin Yata Dehe, he is not actually the chief person acting through the senses, mind, and so on. The soul can merely act in cooperation with the supersoul because it is the supersoul who gives him directions to act or not act. Matas mitir jnanam apohanam cha. One cannot act without his, meaning Krishna's, sanction, for the supersoul is upadrasta and anumanta, the witness and the sanctioner. I like that. The witness and the sanctioner. One who studies carefully under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master can understand the real knowledge that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is actually the conductor of all activities. Okay, that's the main statement. Is actually the conductor of all activities of the individual soul and the controller of their results as well. Although the individual soul possesses the indriyas or senses, he is not actually the proprietor for the proprietor is the supersoul. Consequently, the supersoul is called Rishikesha, and the individual soul is advised by the direction of the supersoul to surrender to him and thus be happy. Sarvadharman Parityaja Mamekam Saranam Vraja. Thus he can become immortal and be transferred to the spiritual kingdom, where he will achieve the highest success of an eternal, blissful life of knowledge. In conclusion, the individual soul is different from the body, senses, living force, and the airs within the body. And above him is the supersoul, who gives the individual soul all facilities. The individual soul who renders everything to the Supreme Soul lives very happily within the body. Okay, well, that's very profound statements here. Those are very profound statements. Ultimately, it's trying to maintain I am not this body. Now, everybody believes I am this body, and that is an illusory, uh, let's say, uh, principle. It's not true. At no state of existence am I this body, because I can ask you a question. Which body are you talking about? The body is always changing. So you cannot say, I am this body. That is the actual fact that we have a body, but it's constantly changing. Therefore, we have no control of the body. And it is different than our soul, which never changes. We have a soul that never changes, and it's covered by a body that always changes. That means that we are not this body. But most people are convinced I am this body, even though it's always changing. And they identify with the body that's always changing and ignore the fact that they are not this body. They are simply the, let's say, temporary uh, habitant or they temporarily have this body, which is always changing. So therefore, you cannot say, I am this body. I am simply uh, the soul in the body. And that soul in the body never changes. It's not subject to birth, death, old age, and disease. So then someone can ask the question, well, who am I exactly? I am the witness of all the changes of the body. That means that I'm not this body. If one comes to that conception of life, then he is not disturbed by any situation in the material world. That's why uh, it says, let me see here. Although the individual soul possesses the indriyas or senses, he is not actually the proprietor, for the proprietor is the supersoul. Consequently, the supersoul is called Rishikesha, and the individual soul is advised by the direction of the supersoul to surrender to him and thus be happy. Sarva dharmam prityaja mamekam saranambraja. Thus he can become immortal and be transferred to the spiritual kingdom, where he will achieve the highest success of an eternal, blissful life of knowledge. In conclusion, the individual soul is different from the body, senses, living force, and the airs within the body. And above them is the supersoul, who gives the individual soul all facilities, the individual soul who renders everything to the super soul lives very happily within the body.
Mm.
Well, how many people understand this? Not many people. And that's why they're not very satisfied. The body is always changing. They don't understand why that's happening. And it puts them in a state uh, of misery, actually, because so many things are happening that they don't understand. However, someone who is stoic, who is not disturbed by the changes of the body, who's not disturbed by the different situations that occur in this world, but is always steady in devotional service, that is a real person. They are not disturbed by all the different changes that are going on. Then they are uh, qualified to go back to Godhead because they're always focused on devotional service to the Lord. That is their real identity. If you say, I am this body, it's wrong. If you say, I am the eternal servant of Krishna, that is right. That is eternal. That means that I am the eternal servant of Krishna. That means that they're not identifying with the body. They're identifying with the soul. And the real function of the soul is to serve Krishna with love and devotion. Text 46, the five material elements, the 10 senses, and the mind all combine to form the various parts of the gross and subtle bodies. The living entity comes in contact with his material bodies, whether high or low, and later gives them up by his personal prowess. This strength can be perceived in a living entity's personal power to possess different types of bodies. Well, yeah, if someone says, I am this body, well, I can ask that person a question. Which body are you talking about?
Mm.
You've had so many bodies, from birth to death, so many bodies. So, therefore, the question is, all right, then who am I? The answer is uh, you are the person who is experiencing the changes of the body. That's who you are. And that person is not subject to the changes of the body. He's immortal. But due to ignorance, he identifies with the body and is not capable of understanding his position in the material world. Purport: the conditioned soul has knowledge, and if he wants to fully utilize the gross and subtle bodies for his real advancement in life, he can do so. It is therefore said here that by his high intelligence, Svena Tejasa, by the superior power of superior knowledge, achieved from the right source, the spiritual master or acharya, he can give up his conditional life in a material body and return home back to Godhead. However, if he wants to keep himself in the darkness of this material world, he can do so. The Lord confirms this as follows in Bhagavad Gita 9.25. Yanti deva vatan devan, pitrin yanti pitrivrata, utani yanti bhuteja, yanti mad ajinopimam. Those who worship the demigods will take birth among the demigods. Those who worship the ghosts and spirits will take birth among such beings. Those who worship ancestors go to the ancestors, and those who worship me will live with me. That's a very important verse. The human form of body is valuable. I can use this body to go to the higher planetary systems, to Pitraloka, or he can remain in this lower planetary system. But if one tries, he can also return home back to Godhead. Okay, see, now those are, that is the factual situation of the soul. He can remain always a victim of the material body, identifying with it, and undergoing always the the process of birth, old age, disease, and death. Or he can identify with his soul and the relation of his soul to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and become free from this vicious cycle of birth and death. This prowess means power, is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the Supersoul. Okay, what is that? What is this prowess? Uh, the human form of body is valuable. One can use this body to go to the higher planetary systems, to Pitrid Loka, or he can remain in this lower planetary system. But if one tries, he can also return home back to Godhead. This prowess or this power is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the Supersoul. Therefore, the Lord says, Mata Smritir Jnanam Apohanam Cha. From me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. If one wants to receive real knowledge from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become free from bondage to repeated acceptance of material bodies. Yeah, one can be free from the change of the bodies. If one takes to devotional service of the Lord and surrenders unto him, the Lord is prepared to give one directions by which to return home back to Godhead. But if one foolishly wants to keep himself in darkness, he can continue in a life of material existence. Okay, what is it saying exactly? It means that if we surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead by always engaging in Krishna conscious activities, always meditating on Krishna, always serving the Lord in this lifetime with the capacities that we have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and so forth, always focused on serving the Lord and hopefully developing love and devotion for the Lord, then we are in our right position to go back to Godhead. If we ignore all these things and simply eat, sleep, mate, and defend like an animal, we will remain always victims of the material, what you would say, rat race of birth, death, old age, and disease. We will always be stuck uh, uh, in that position. So we have to make a decision. How are we going to use this body? Are we going to use the body for sense gratification and always be in anxiety and being subject to birth and death? Or are we going to use this body in the service of Krishna, always meditating on Krishna and ultimately remembering Krishna at the moment of death and going back to Godhead? We have to think seriously. What are we going to do with this body, with this mind? Are we going to use it in Krishna's service, or are we going to use it for sense gratification? It ultimately comes down to this point. How are we going to use this body? For sense gratification or for service to Krishna? Text 47. As long as the spirit soul is covered by the subtle body, consisting of the mind, intelligence, and false ego, he is bound to the results of his fruitive activities. Because of this covering, the spirit soul is connected with the material energy and must accordingly suffer material conditions and reversals continually, life after life. Okay, now this is a very profound statement. Let me read that again. As long as the spirit soul is covered by the subtle body, therefore we have a gross body and we have a subtle body. Both are we are both conditioned or covered by a gross body and a subtle body. So it says, as long as the spirit soul is covered by the subtle body, consisting of the mind, intelligence, and false ego, he is bound to the results of his fruitive activities. Because of this covering, the spirit soul is connected with the material energy and must accordingly suffer material conditions and reversals continually, life after life. And now, see, this is one of those monumental verses that is setting before us the decisions that we have to make in life. Do we want to have a life of sense gratification, like the animals, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending? Or do we want to have a life of Krishna consciousness where we're using our body and our mind and all assets that we have in the service of the Lord? This is a question we have to ask ourselves. If we only engage in animalistic behavior, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, and ignoring the existence of Krishna, then we're no better than an animal. That's what animals do. They eat, they sleep, they mate, and defend. How does a human being, uh, uh, how does a human being identify himself? Well, if I identify myself with the body, I'm no better than an animal. If I identify myself with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and act in the service of the Lord with love and devotion, I am no longer an animal. I am a real person. So we have to decide in our life how we're going to identify ourselves. If I identify with the body, I'm an animal. If I identify myself as the eternal servant of the Lord and act in that way, I'm no longer an animal. I am a real human being who is prepared to go back to Godhead. Text 47. Purport. The living entity is bound by the subtle body, consisting of the mind, intelligence, and false ego. At the time of death, therefore, the position of the mind becomes the cause for the next body. As confirmed, well, see, when it says it's uh, the mind becomes the cause for the next body, yeah, if our mind is focused on Krishna, then the next body we have is our spiritual body, and we go back to the spiritual world. If it still has many, uh, let's say, uh, desires for sense gratification, we stay in the material world with different types of temporary bodies. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 8.6, Yam Yam Vapi Smaran Bhavam Tijat Ante Kalebram. At the time of death, the mind sets the criteria for the spirit souls being carried to another type of body. Okay. At the time of death, the mind sets the criteria for the spirit souls being carried to another type of body. Yeah, it can be taken to another type of mundane body made of material elements, or it can go back to the spiritual world with a spiritual body. If the living being resists the dictation of the mind and engages the mind in loving service of the Lord, the mind cannot degrade him. The duty of all human beings, therefore, is to keep the mind always engaged at the lotus feet of the Lord. Savai mana Krishna padara vrindayo. And how do we understand that? That means that we're always engaged in Krishna conscious activities. That means that we are engaged at the lotus feet of the Lord. When the mind is engaged at the lotus feet of Krishna, the intelligence is purified. And then the intelligence gets inspiration from the super soul. The Dhammi Buddhi Yogam Tam. Thus, the living entity makes progress toward liberation from material bondage. The individual soul is subject to the laws of fruitive activity, but the super soul, Paramatma, is not affected by the fruitive activities of the individual soul. As confirmed in the Vedic Upanishad, the Paramatma and the Jivatma, who are likened to two birds, are sitting in the body. The Jivatma is enjoying or suffering by eating the fruits of the bodily activities. But the Paramatma, who is free from such bondage, witnesses the sanctions and activities of the individual soul as the individual soul desires. Now that's a good statement. Everything depends on what we desire. If we desire sense gratification, then the super soul becomes the witness of our what you would call sense gratificatory activities. But if we desire Krishna, then the super soul is again the seer, but he sees us engaged in devotional service, and in that way we become liberated from the cycle of birth and death. Everything depends on what we are desiring. We have to be very careful. If our only desire is to go back to Godhead, and how do you know one wants to go back to Godhead? He or she is always engaged in devotional service to the Lord and has no attachment to the body. Anyway, no one has attachment to the body because the body is always changing, but they can falsely maintain attachment to the body, and that way they become victims of ignorance. If we understand that the body actually belongs to Krishna, and therefore it should be used only in the service of Krishna, that means we have knowledge. And that means that we are on the right track to go back to Godhead. But if one thinks that, no, I identify with this body and I want to use the body for sense gratification, then one is in complete ignorance and will stay always a victim of the material world, taking different types of bodies. There's 8,400,000 different types of bodies. And one can take different types of bodies and stay in the material world, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Okay, so then it says, second, text 48. It is fruitless to see and talk of the material modes of nature and their resultant so-called happiness and distress as if they were factual. When the mind wanders during the day and a man begins to think himself extremely important, or when he dreams at night and sees a beautiful woman enjoying with him, these are merely false dreams. Similarly, the happiness and distress caused by the material senses should be understood to be meaningless. Oh, that's a great statement. The happiness and distress caused by material senses should be understood to be meaningless. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The happiness and distress derived from the activities of the material senses are not actual happiness and distress. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita speaks of happiness that is transcendental to the material conception of life. Sukham atyantikam yatad buddhi graham atindriyam. When our senses are purified of material contamination, they become atindriya, transcendental senses. And when the transcendental senses are engaged in the service of the master of the senses, Rishikesha, meaning Krishna, one can derive real transcendental pleasure. Whatever distress or happiness we manufacture by mental concoction through the subtle mind has no reality, but is simply a mental concoction. One should therefore not imagine so-called happiness through mental concoction. Rather, the best course is to engage the mind in the service of the Lord, Rishikesha, and thus feel real bliss. Rather, the best course is to engage the mind in the service of the Lord, Rishikesha, and thus feel real blissful life. Okay? So that is our real takeaway today. The best course is to engage the mind in the service of the Lord, Rishikesha, and thus feel real blissful life. There is a Vedic statement, Apama Somam Amrita Abhuma Apsaro Bir Viharama. With reference to such a conception, one wants to go to the heavenly planets to enjoy with the young girls there and drink somarasa. that's a very illusory desire. Such imaginary, see, it's illusory. Such imaginary pleasure, however, has no value, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7.23. Antavatu phalam te sam tad bhavati alpamedasam. Men of small intelligence worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. Even if by fruitive activity or worship of the demigods, one is elevated to the higher planetary systems for sense enjoyment, his situation is condemned in Bhagavad Gita as antavat, perishable, temporary. It's not going to last forever. It's going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in the end, we realize that we wasted our life. The happiness one enjoys in this way is like the pleasure of embracing a young woman in a dream. For some time, it may be pleasing, but actually, the basic principle is false. Okay, that's good. The mental concoctions of happiness and distress in this material world are compared to dreams because of their falseness. All thoughts of obtaining happiness by using the material senses have a false background and therefore have no meaning. Yeah, so someone who's addicted to sense gratification, they're basically wasting their life. and avoiding any ability to make spiritual advancement. They remain day after day in mundane activities, mundane desires, mundane life. And it's very sad. Eating, sleeping, mating, and defending like animals. Text 49. Those who have full knowledge of self realization, who know very well that the spirit soul is eternal, whereas the body is perishable, are not overwhelmed by lamentation, but persons who lack knowledge of self realization certainly lament. Therefore, it is difficult to educate a person in illusion. Wow, that is true. It is difficult to educate a person in illusion. I've actually seen that, not only in myself, but in other people also. It is difficult to educate a person in illusion. Why? Because they are overwhelmed by the desire for sense gratification. And they're not really interested in making spiritual advancement. They want to make material advancement. And that is a false, let's say, desire that can basically consume the entire understanding of a human being and waste an entire human life on mundane activities. Very dangerous. Purport. According to Mimamsic philosophers, everything is eternal, nitya. And according to the Sankhya philosophers, everything is mitya, or anitya, impermanent. So the Mimamsa philosophers claim that everything is eternal, or nitya. And the Sankhya philosophers claim that everything is mitya, or anitya, impermanent. Nonetheless, without real knowledge of Atma, the soul, such philosophers must be bewildered and must continue to lament as Sudras. Srila Sukadeva Goswami therefore said to Parikshit Maharaj, Shrotavya dini Rajendra Nrinam Santi Sahasrasa Apasyatam Atmatatvam Grihesu Grihat Medinam. Those who are materially engrossed, being blind to knowledge of the ultimate truth, have many subjects for hearing in human society. O Emperor, Bhagavad, Bhagavatam 2.1.2. For ordinary persons engaged in material activities, there are many, many subject matters to understand because such persons do not understand self-realization. So they have many, many subject matters to understand because such persons do not understand self-realization. One must therefore be educated in self-realization so that under any circumstances in life, he will remain steady in his vows. Ah, that's a real person. One who stays steady in his vows of Krishna consciousness. That means he's a real person. Is our time over?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good takeaway from today. Those who are materially engrossed, being blind to knowledge of the ultimate truth, have many subjects for hearing in human society. O Emperor. Bhagavatam 2.1.2. For ordinary persons engaged in material activities, there are many, many subject matters to understand because such persons do not understand self-realization. One must therefore be educated in self-realization so that under any circumstances in life, he will remain steady in his vows. Well, some people never take vows. they, they're just ignorant. And some people do take vows, but don't follow them. And there are other people who take vows of Krishna consciousness and actually follow them. So every one of us, as devotees, we have taken vows, right? No meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, no intoxication. Always chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and engaging in devotional service. So if we follow our vows, we are a real person and we become qualified to go back to Godhead. If we break our vows, we're no longer a real person and we will be engaged in sense gratificatory activities all the time and stay permanently, stay for an indefinite time in the material world. Haribol, that is our take it away for today. Hare Krishna. Are there any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, Danvat Pranam.
Hare Krishna.
Maharaj, can you please explain more about Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva?
Okay. Achintya Veda Aveda Sattva. The tattva means the truth. So, what is the truth of human life? It is to become the servant of the servant of the servant of genuine devotees. That is the actual truth. If we become the servant of the servant of the servant of devotees and ultimately of Krishna, we actually become a real person and we become qualified to go back to the spiritual world. If we do not take seriously every moment of this human life to be used in the service of Krishna, then we're not a real person and we are like a ping pong ball being banged one way and another, always changing our opinions, always being fooled by materialistic desires to make sense, to have sense gratification. So the truth of a spiritual life is our determination to follow the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness without any hiatus, without stopping. Every moment of our life should be dedicated to serving Krishna and developing love and devotion for the Lord and engaging in activities of love and devotion for the Lord. Otherwise, we become a non person, a person who does not have steady engagement in devotional service, always wavering, always making mistakes, always uh, having desires for sense gratification. So, therefore, one is recognized by one's activities. So, if our activities are always dedicated to Krishna, we're a real person. And if our desires are always focused on sense gratification, we're not a real person. We are a person who has not understood the real purpose of life. And therefore, it says here, those who have full knowledge of self-realization, who know very well that the spirit soul is eternal, whereas the body is perishable, are not overwhelmed by lamentation. But persons who lack knowledge of the self-realization certainly lament. Therefore, it is difficult to educate a person in illusion. Yeah, I remember when my father died. My mother cried for like I think uh, for not like one day. She was crying for a long, long time. Now you can't cry forever, of course. And she didn't continue crying forever, but she did cry for a long time because she was not Krishna conscious. She was connected, or she was focused on the material body. Therefore, it is difficult to educate a person in illusion. So all that crying is a situation of illusion, being connected to the body rather than to the soul, and then lamenting when there is death. Yes.
Maharaj, in text 43, it is written that the Paramatma, the super personality, supreme personality of Godhead, appears separate from the living being, but it is actually, but is actually separate and not separate simultaneously. Maharaj,
Okay, so
but
Canto 7, Chapter 2, text 43, right?
yes, yes, Maharaj.
As fire, although situated in wood, is perceived to be different from the wood, as air, although situated within the mouth and nostrils, is perceived to be separate, and as the sky, although all pervading, never mixes with anything, so this living entity, although now encaged within the material body, of which it is the source, is separate from it. That's what we're talking about, right?
Yes, and in the purport, Maharaj, it is written in the purport uh, that as fire appears separate from the wood, and as the air flowing through the nostrils and mouth of the body appears separate from the body, so the Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appears separate from the living beings, but is actually separate and not separate simultaneously.
What
This
is your question?
philosophy.
What is your question?
So I want to understand this statement, Maharaj. This philosophy is called Achintya Bheda Abheda Tattva, propounded by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. What does it mean that Supreme Personality of Godhead appears separate from the living being, but is actually separate and not separate simultaneously?
Well, that means that uh, it's the statement, Me bina pakritir astada, the eight separated energies of the Lord. But although the eight gross and subtle material energies, namely earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego, are stated to be bina, separate from the Lord, actually they are not. In other words, as fire appears separate from wood, and as the air flowing through the nostrils and mouth of the body appear separate from the body, so the Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appears separate from the living being, but is actually separate and not separate simultaneously. This is the philosophy of Achintya Veda Abheda Tattva, propounded by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So that is the understanding that we are living in this material world in a body made of matter with a soul that is spiritual and eternal. Now, which way are we going to identify ourselves? With the body of matter or with the soul that is eternal? And we will understand which way we're going to be, let's say, attached to by our behavior. If we behave as a devotee, always engaged in devotional service, that means that we will be preparing ourselves to go back to God. And if we act as a karmi, always engaged in sense gratification, we're going to stay in the material world. So therefore, you don't have to be a PhD to understand a person and their, let's say, what you would call their destiny. People that are engaged always in sense gratification, their destiny is to remain birth after birth in the material world. People who engage in devotional service every day are preparing themselves to go back to Godhead. So you don't need to, let's say, guess. You can know what's going to happen to a person by their activity, desires, and associations, and so forth. If they're always engaged in devotional service with faith and devotion to Krishna, they're going to go back to Godhead. If they're always in the middle, sometimes Krishna conscious, sometimes not Krishna conscious, they're going to stay in the material world. And those who are not at all Krishna conscious, they're going to suffer unnecessarily their whole life and many, many more lifetimes. So you don't need to basically ask a person, who are you exactly? You can know by their activities. If they're talking nonsense always, then you know who they are. If they're sometimes talking nonsense, sometimes trying to talk Krishna consciousness, you know that they are very, let's say, uh, whimsical person. But if a person is always Krishna conscious, then you know this is a real devotee. So you don't need to ask a person, who are you? You simply watch them, hear them, and you'll know right away who they are. Therefore, it says here, even a common man coming to his senses can know that the real person who was within the body and was hearing and replying was never seen. For that which was never seen, what is the need of lamentation? So here it says, yeah. Therefore, in effect, the common man concludes that actually the spirit soul was different from the body and has now gone away. Thus, even a common man coming to his senses can know that the real person who was within the body and was hearing and replying was never seen. For that which was never seen, what is the need of lamentation? Yeah, that means you never really die. You have an eternal soul. It simply changes the body, but it is never actually destroyed. That means one is stoic. They're not, let's say, upended, or they're not devastated by birth, death, old age, and disease. They know that the soul is eternal. However, one can misuse the body and suffer unnecessarily many births and deaths. And someone who is Krishna conscious, they can use the body in Krishna's service and go back to Godhead. Both ways, both persons can be understood very quickly by a devotee. One is preparing himself to go back to Godhead, and the other is preparing himself to stay in the material world. So a devotee will associate only with those people who are preparing themselves to go back to Godhead and avoid the association of people who are preparing themselves to stay in the material world life after life. That is our takeaway for today. And in the purport today, it says, the common man concludes that actually the spirit soul was different from the body and has now gone away. Thus, even a common man, coming to his senses, can know that the real person who was within the body and was hearing and replying was never seen. For that which was never seen, what is the need of lamentation? Yeah, I remember when my father died. My mother was lamenting for like I think it's at least 10 days, and always crying, always being very, very morose and so forth. And I didn't understand that. I didn't cry at all. Why? Because I was not really uh, attached to my father. When Srila Prabhupada left his body, did I cry? Again, I didn't really cry at that time. I was not happy, but I didn't cry. Why? Because when I was a devote, when I was not a devotee, I didn't cry because I was ignorant. When I was a devotee, I didn't cry because I understood that the soul is eternal. So this crying business does not really make you one way or the other, either advanced or not advanced. Uh, Lamenting when a person dies, well, that's a normal thing. But having a, let's say, neutral uh, composure when there is happiness or distress means one is actually educated. Instead of crying, one becomes, when as a devotee, instead of crying for someone who leaves the body, one should become more determined to have to follow the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness and use every minute in the service of Krishna. That should give us more, uh, let's say, uh, determination to be Krishna conscious when a devotee dies. Whereas a materialistic person, when somebody dies, they feel completely, let's say, uh, um, confused and are not sure about what is the real purpose of life. And they get upset and cry for the body, not for the soul. That means that when a person dies, if they're lamenting and crying, either they are a devotee or not a devotee. In other words, most devotees, when someone dies, like the spiritual master, they will lament the fact that they will not see physically the body of the person that has died, but they never are forgetful of the person because they're as devotees they always meditate on Guru and Krishna. Whereas other people, they will lament for some time, and then little by little they forget all about the person that died and continue having mundane activities in the material world. Whereas the devotee, he will be sad that the, let's say, spiritual master, let's say, has died, but he knows that the spiritual master is not dead. And he becomes more stalwart in his practice of Krishna consciousness, meaning that he will never forget the spiritual master. He gets more and more determined to follow the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness and to always think of the spiritual master and his teachings. Whereas a mundane person will lament for some time, and little by little, they'll forget everything and go on with mundane life. They don't really learn anything by somebody's death. They might immediately say so many things. Oh, we'll never forget you. We love you, blah, blah, blah. But very quickly they will forget everything and go on with their mundane life. But in Krishna consciousness, the devotee does not think that the spiritual master is dead. He knows that the spiritual master is eternal. And he has some short period of a little bit of lamentation, but he comes to his senses and becomes more determined to follow strictly the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness, meaning that he never forgets his vows of initiation and always continues in devotional service. Okay, so taking the vow of initiation are very important, of utmost importance, because that defines who you are. So when we take the vows of initiation, no meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, no intoxication, always chanting Hare Krishna, and always having nice prasadam, always hearing lectures given by nice devotees, good devotees, always engaging in devotional service. That means that we are not lamenting birth and death. We are glorifying the uh, activities of a genuine devotee. So instead of lamenting, we are rather glorifying a pure devotee when somebody dies who has dedicated their life to Krishna consciousness. And that reinforces our faith in Krishna consciousness. We're not devastated in the sense that we get angry at God because somebody that we love died. Okay, are there any questions or comments?
We'll regroup for tomorrow. You also have one call that you need to take, Maharaj, from India. It is called.
Okay.
So can I end the?
Yeah.
Hare Krishna. Thank you all.